In the industrial city of Pittsburgh during the early 1920s, smoke curled from the chimneys of steel mills, painting the sky in shades of ash and fire. The streets pulsed with the rhythm of progress, men in flat caps marching to work, trolley bells clanging as they carried workers to factories, children scurrying barefoot through alleys with paper sacks of bread. Life here was hard, the kind that left deep lines on faces and calluses on hands before a man turned 30. Inside one such factory, rows of machines thundered endlessly, pressing, hammering, and shaping molten steel into rails that stretched across the nation. The factory floor was a symphony of clanging iron, shouts over the roar, and sweat dripping into the dirt. Supervisors barked orders, men worked until their backs ached, and no one ever looked up unless it was to wipe soot from their eyes. In this world, men were machines as much as the gears they oiled, unnoticed, uncelebrated, and forgotten. Among these men was Thomas, a wiry worker with tired eyes and a quiet nature. He wasn't the strongest, nor the fastest, but he had a meticulous touch, noticing things others missed. When a machine's gears squealed, Thomas heard it first. When the furnace burned too hot, Thomas saw the danger before anyone else, yet his contributions went largely unseen. The supervisors never bothered to remember his name. To them, he was just another pair of hands in the endless sea of laborers. Each day he clocked in, worked his shift, and went home with aching muscles and little more than a few coins in his pocket. His life seemed destined to be as gray as the smoke that covered the city. He longed for something more, not riches, but recognition, a sign that his work mattered. But no one ever gave it. The factory owner, Mr. Whitmore, was a man of great ambition. His suits were pressed, his shoes polished, and his words sharp as blades. He cared for efficiency, production, profit, everything measurable in numbers. He often stormed onto the factory floor, shouting at supervisors about delays, reprimanding workers for small mistakes, and demanding results at any cost. He believed fear was the whip that drove men forward, and for years he had run his empire on this belief. But despite his wealth, Whitmore carried a frustration. His factory bled talent. Workers came and went, the turnover rate draining his resources. Skilled men left for other factories, morale plummeted, and accidents were rising. Whitmore thought he needed better machines, stricter rules, harsher discipline. What he truly needed, he could not see. One particularly sweltering summer, disaster nearly struck. A great furnace overheated, threatening to spill molten steel across the floor. Panic rippled through the workers, but Thomas, unnoticed Thomas, sprang forward. He pulled the right levers, jammed a block under a failing gear, and with his steady hands prevented what could have been a catastrophic explosion. The men breathed sighs of relief, muttering thanks, but the supervisors brushed past, too frantic with cleanup to give Thomas a second look. By the end of the shift, no one spoke of it. To the factory, it was just another day's survived. To Thomas, it was another wound in his heart. He trudged home, his heroic act buried under silence. But fate had other plans. That evening, Whitmore hosted a dinner with potential investors. One of the guests, a retired steelman, spoke about loyalty and morale. Machines don't build empires, men do. Treat a man like a number, and he'll give you the least. But treat him like he matters, and he'll give you his soul. The words struck Whitmore harder than he expected. That night, alone in his office, he thought of his factory floor. Faces he never knew, names he never cared to learn. He thought of the accidents, the constant departures, the sullen eyes of his men. For the first time he wondered, what if the flaw wasn't in them, but in me? The next morning, Whitmore did something no one had ever seen. He walked the factory floor, not with a scowl, but with intent eyes. He didn't bark orders. He asked names. When he reached Thomas, who stood adjusting a machine belt, Whitmore paused. "You're Thomas, aren't you?" he said. The worker stiffened, unsure if this was a rebuke. "Yes, sir," he muttered. Whitmore surprised him with a nod. "I heard about yesterday. They say you stopped a furnace overflow." Thomas blinked, startled that anyone had noticed. Whitmore extended his hand, something the workers had never witnessed. "You may have saved lives. I want to thank you for your courage and your skill." Thomas stared at that hand, rough and scarred from years of labor, before slowly shaking it. In that moment, for the first time in his life, he felt seen. Word of the encounter spread through the factory like wildfire. The men, who once saw Whitmore as an untouchable tyrant, whispered in disbelief. They said he shook a worker's hand. He called him by name. For Thomas, the change was profound. He returned home not with heavier pay, but with something more valuable: pride. His children gathered around him at supper, and when he spoke of the owner's words, their eyes filled with admiration. His wife, who had seen his shoulders droop with exhaustion year after year, noticed a new light in his gaze. The world hadn't changed, but Thomas had. He felt like a man whose work mattered. In the weeks that followed, Whitmore continued this new experiment. He began learning the names of his workers, calling them out with warmth instead of barked orders. When a man completed a task well, Whitmore didn't shrug it off. He praised him sincerely, never with flattery, but with specifics that showed he truly noticed. He complimented a welder's steady hand, a mechanic's quick repair, a foreman's fair leadership. Slowly the factory floor transformed. The men stood straighter, their work sharper, accidents fewer. Loyalty blossomed where resentment once lived. Whitmore learned a truth no machine could teach. Appreciation costs nothing, but its power is immeasurable. Men who once looked for other jobs now stayed, proud to wear his badge. Productivity soared, not because of stricter rules or harsher punishments, but because the men felt valued. They worked not for fear of Whitmore, but out of respect for him, and more importantly, respect for themselves. And at the heart of this change was Thomas, the quiet man who had once been invisible. Whitmore promoted him to foreman, not as a gesture of charity, but because his steady hands and loyal spirit had earned it. Years later, as Whitmore's factory became one of the most successful in Pittsburgh, he often reflected on the lesson he had almost missed. Success had not come from machines, nor from strict discipline, nor from his ambition alone. It had come from recognizing the worth of the men who built his empire. He realized that men starve more for appreciation than for bread, and when you feed their hunger for dignity, they will give you their best. Thomas lived the rest of his life as more than just a worker. He was remembered as the man whose courage and quiet strength reshaped an entire factory spirit. And Whitmore carried with him the timeless principle: people will work harder, live fuller, and stay loyal not for money alone, but for honest, sincere appreciation.